All right, I'm going to continue working on my drawing that I believe will end up being a painting of the Hobbit. Basically, this is the scene where Gandalf and the dwarves leave early before Bilbo wakes up. And so I'll go ahead and continue this. Yeah. I like to start with just like, usually I start with their heads and then work down from there. I'm thinking this figure's probably a little bit further away, kind of like this character, maybe even a little more so, based on its general size and positioning here. I'm not really trying. I'm basically just going with random doors for the moment. I'll probably do a little more research. I'm imagining this is Thor Oakenshield here. I'll probably need to add some kind of shield to indicate that a little bit better. As I recall, when I read it, there wasn't a ton of distinction in the other dwarves, and I'm not really trying to copy the movie or anything per se. Maybe this one's got like a smaller pony though. I'm trying to make them all like this shape here for the pony is very stout. Trying to kind of emphasize that these are dwarves. Their mounts are kind of similar to themselves. It's almost a shame to cover up some of this background detail that I've worked on, but that's all right. I'm drawing lines here. They're actually intersecting with this cape, so they won't actually be shown, but that's okay. It's good for making sure that you're consistent on where things should be. I'm not 100% sure just yet if I'm going to do the full 12 dwarves. I mean, it makes sense to do that, I suppose. So that's probably what I'll do. Maybe I'll have them kind of sneaking into the background a little bit. We'll see. Here's kind of a trick, is making sure all these different ponies have reasonable poses. I can't say that I am a horse expert per se. I do look at references on the side just because I'm not really. I can draw them okay, but I don't always know what would make the most sense. Specific poses, particularly when I can't just use, the few that I'm accustomed to using when I do draw horses. pause here for a minute. I think generally how this is turning out. However, with the idea that this is in the background, a lot of us may not even be visible, so I don't need to worry about a ton of details necessarily. Let's see. I do kind of like having this gap here. I might even put a little hobbit over here watching them. So maybe I'll leave that in place. But maybe there's like another horse right here. I don't care to draw the horses first. I actually did that on Gandalf. I drew the horse first, started drawing Gandalf. Gandalf's turned out really good, but the horse was way too small, and even in some ways this might not be the largest horse. But it was way small relative to Gandalf, and I had to basically erase it and start over. I will just do this. I can see already the shape forming here. Just like that. And because of this horse's or the pony's position here, there's actually a good chance you won't see the dwarf terribly well, but I'll try to get him in here. And we're just going to do our classic basic dwarf look here. Maybe this is a bald dwarf here. Who knows? I guess I do. All right. This will need to kind of look a little better. This, since I kind of a lot more here. I'm seeing almost like the bangs here, but it's actually the root in the background forming it. So I probably shouldn't do that just because it will sort of conflict with. It's called tangents. You don't want to have tangents on unrelated items or things. So let's try that. Horses kind of have like this little lip thing here going. It's kind of just a really subtle shape. Okay. And let's see. Just kind of move this away a little bit. And I actually think I'll maybe make the leg kind of pop up a little bit here. So horses have all the same anatomy that a human has essentially, but it's just reorganized a little bit differently. So this up here is virtually their upper arm. This is their forearm. Kind of like this. This would be their foot, and the hoof itself is actually what would be considered a toe. I just try to keep that in mind when I'm drawing any horses. So we have our foot and our toe here. It's good to intersect it a little bit, just to show off that, yeah, we have some variation here on distance. This is obviously a little more in the foreground than the previous one. There's our foot, there's our toe. This also kind of helps indicate, you know, this guy's actually maybe even a little closer than these guys. A little heart altar here. At least I think that's what it's called. I don't know. Again, I'm not a horse expert per se. I have looked at a lot of references, but it doesn't mean I know the words for stuff. Oops. Okay. So that's not too bad. In fact, I feel like this might be a little too small or too pronounced for position here. Okay. Just put a little dwarf hand over here. Indicate he would also kind of have his no, I guess he wouldn't be super prominent as far as feet. He's basically hunched over here. Okay. That's great so far. I'm gonna, again, not focus too much on details just yet, because I'm still working out precisely where everything's happening here. So it shows that they're coming obviously from this direction, but maybe they wrap around here. Maybe so I've got 4 up here. If I'm doing 12, I need to do another 8. And these actually will probably be a lot easier just because they're going to be so much smaller. I'll do a little bean here for a horse. I think it'd be kind of funny to have like one of the ponies kind of just fighting the dwarf. I don't have a good reference for that, frankly, but I might be able to make it happen just by paying attention to that anatomy. Again, the upper arm, forearm, foot, and hoof. Just make sure we do it again. And I'm trying to illustrate resistance. So I want the horse to be basically putting everything it's got in the opposite direction of where the dwarf is going to be trying to drag him. We'll have our reins coming up this way. Maybe he really likes the Shire, I don't know. See, I'm not sure just yet if I want him, which direction I want him walking here. Now I'm facing the horse or I'm walking away from it, trying to drag it. So, just give it a try. I'll be like the only dwarf that's walking. I think this actually doesn't make sense. Because if the horse is dragging so hard, I think I actually want the dwarf to kind of have the reverse. He's grabbing it. He's got his hand out. He's got his other arm out. He's giving it all he's got just to make it go. All right. I can clean this up a little bit. I'm just trying to get some gesture in here so I can understand better. So, definitely not doing great on proportions necessarily. this is the pack horse, though, you know. It just doesn't want to come. It doesn't like. It has been super loaded down. I feel like it looks a little goofy at the moment, but we'll see if we can't make it look better here in a minute. All right, so that's an idea. That gets this up to 5. Maybe we'll put one here. Kind of breaking my rule of starting with the doors first. Just a little bit. I'm trying to keep my hand off the paper so it doesn't smudge as bad. So because the other one is kind of all held up, that actually makes it so I can kind of draw this one in a static position, which makes it a little bit simpler. We'll put our little dwarf up here. My intent is to paint this in the end. I'm thinking about painting in gouache. I haven't actually done any gouache painting, but I think it looks pretty neat. And I really like watercolor, and I know it kind of complements watercolor in a lot of ways. So that's the hope and intent. It's always risky when you try something new, but it's the only way to really improve. So, okay. So we're getting smaller as we're going back. There could be some that are, I mean, frankly, there's going to be some that just wouldn't be in this frame if they're all lined up. Because this is maybe barely enough space for them to go 2 abreast. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So maybe I'll add a horse here. One that you can kind of see moving along just the back side of it. Yeah. I was about to make it flick in its tail, but that'll probably just make it look like it's got too much action, but we'll just put a simple tail going down. And kind of the back of a dwarf, a little cloak here. Yeah. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. So again, 2, 4, it's probably 6, maybe even 8. We'll say 6. So 2 that we can't see. 8. I don't know, I'm back and forth. Let's do maybe another one over here. Also getting held up, that'll, I mean, just from a drawing perspective, that's kind of convenient. I already have most of the action stuff happening over here, so kind of a fun little hold up here. We'll have our horse head kind of going back. And it's getting stuck. I actually just finished the Lord of the Rings books very recently, as far as reading them. I really liked them. Give him a helmet. I haven't actually done very many helmets here. Let's make this guy kind of similar. Okay. I really need to adjust this guy. He's not looking right. But I think maybe if I just add one more, I think that'll be a really solid number for my setup here. So I just need to make sure it's a little smaller, keeping everything in perspective as it should be. And maybe he's just a little behind, so he's actually still moving. Happening. As we get further away, there's much less detail that should be happening. And the kind of the lines where the reins are coming from. Maybe I'll give this guy like a little shield. I should certainly have more bags, frankly. They're supposed to be traveling, right? So I'll probably come back to this guy here in a minute. I actually think I'm going to leave a lot more of him open than I originally thought. And you just kind of bounce around in your drawing just to make sure everything looks kind of reasonable. This helps you get a fresh perspective, because if you spend too much time in one spot, you end up with inconsistencies oftentimes. Just kind of updating some of this. I recently did created a 3D model of a horse. I think that was really good to try to prep myself for doing this, since I had to know exactly how it kind of should look from all angles. Just kind of reinforcing some of these lines I'd made earlier. I think they're pretty solid. You always go light and loose, and you can come back with a fresh perspective and commit to what makes sense. I'm kind of imagining him being the least packed, because he's kind of their leader a lot of times. I don't know. I mean, I guess I did get the sense that he was a bad leader, but it seems that leaders are oftentimes less likely to carry the same kind of weight. There. See, I want to accentuate this right here, make sure we all understand this is his arm. I'll go ahead and just kind of make this a bracer. And he's got kind of his clothes underneath. The nice thing about them all basically being doing the exact same thing, and in this case they're all, riding ponies and kind of going at a leisurely pace, is it makes sense that most of the riders would have a pretty similar pose here. There's our horn of our saddle. That's one thing I didn't really research, is like what did medieval saddles look like? I'm just kind of winging it based on what I know about regular saddles, which I think is probably okay, but I mean, especially considering this is all fantasy anyway. But okay, I want him. Let's give him kind of like I don't actually know what they are called, but you know, kind of that armor garb. Kind of covers your upper legs. Here's his knee. Here's his boot. Something interesting about the Hobbit movies. Again, I'm not really worried about following those. You won't see any specific characters, designs from that. Is that they really wanted to emphasize that they were dwarves. And when they were filming it, it was a little challenging to make sure that that came across. So what they did is they gave them massive boots to kind of really accentuate that. And it actually helped the actors as well, because they wound up walking differently, or kind of kind of a solid footstep, because there's clearly weight behind it all. I don't want to lose the fact that this is the tail of this horse, or pony, as I should say. Let's see, just do something like that. Yeah, but we won't actually see the face at all, which is fine. I'm going to actually erase some of them here, because now I have Hobbit hole details. When I actually started this, I wasn't sure if I was going to go with the full Hobbit, or I didn't actually plan to do any of these guys necessarily. I just kind of wanted a nice landscape. And if you're going to do a landscape, I mean, why feel limited to what's real? But the more I did it, the more it made sense to just commit to something a little more impressive, especially considering you know, I was already spending a lot of time on it. Why not go the full distance and just go ahead and make something a little more involved. So this horse, there's that ear, I need to make sure stays visible. To a certain degree, again, since I'm painting it over, maybe it doesn't matter. I understand gouache is very much like watercolors, with the main difference being that it is a little more opaque, and it actually sits on top of the paper, which will mean it will perhaps be a little more forgiving than watercolor. I think I'll probably start with watercolor. I do really like watercolor. But then I'll start going with gouache just to test it out a little bit. I think like it needs to actually end right about there, which is bad because it starts to bleed into this line right here. You never want that to happen. Maybe I'll try to accentuate this line. Let's just rework this a little bit. Something like that, something like that. There we go. All right. Actually, do this so I can have a little more drift. Okay. I still like the idea of having some little hobbit guy right here, kind of staring at these weird people. When I was looking for ideas on the Shire to draw, the thing that kind of struck me was how unpopulated a lot of the examples were. And I don't know, I kind of imagine the Shire to be kind of a bustling place. Frankly, Bilbo isn't exactly the best example of what a hobbit should be. At the beginning of the Hobbit books, I guess he is, but by the time you get to the Lord of the Rings, he's kind of the guy that a little antisocial. And so I just kind of imagine there being a lot more going on. Kind of like that close-knit farm community. Oh, it's pretty decent, I'd say. Pretty simple, but not too bad. Got a guy folding his arms, just kind of looking at him. All right. Let's revisit this. I don't love how this dwarf is looking. It doesn't look very dwarf proportioned. So let's start by actually giving him a hood. That, yeah. And we'll make sure he's dwarf proportioned properly. Okay. And we'll go and do that. Trying to think here. I feel like the positioning is a little weird too. He should be more right here. He should be pushing kind of like that. Pulling, I guess. We should probably, the angle appears to be enough that we would actually see his other. Like that. Yeah, that looks a little more dwarfish. I won't give him a cloak, I don't think, mostly because I feel like you might lose a bit of the information here about what's going on. And it's fine to have a bit of a gap because it makes sense from a perspective of he's holding up the line. But we got something of a path going kind of through here, kind of over and through, and I feel like we're actually getting pretty close on a lot of this. I didn't expect to come to this point so quickly. I'll probably just kind of keep working it, making sure everything looks about right. Probably some soft shading to some of this background information. It pops a little bit more, but it also doesn't necessarily more detailed. What I need. Extra detail. It's kind of for basically anything that's not directly in the foremost foreground, basically. So even though this is the foreground pony, these legs are a little further away, so I'm just gonna tone them down a little bit here with some shading. That over here on Gandalf Steed. So this is actually not Shadowfax for the Lord of the Rings nerds here. Shadowfax doesn't come along until later, and since this is based on the Hobbit, it wouldn't make sense for him to have him. It's kind of also interesting because again, I know a lot of this stuff because I read it really recently, and maybe I'm gonna get some of this wrong, but Gandalf, when he rode Shadowfax, he rode him bareback. He didn't put any kind of saddle or anything on him. And that was kind of to acknowledge that Shadowfax was kind of his own master. Gandalf was allowed to ride him because he liked him, basically. But Gandalf didn't own him in the traditional sense. I don't know if this is a reasonable pose for a horse, but I think it's gonna look okay. Well, I don't know. Maybe it doesn't look okay. Maybe that looks a little weird. Maybe I'll just put a hoof up here. Just go like that. I think it looks okay. I'm going to need to work probably a little more on some of this cloth, just to, well, clean up the background, because some of the background's still poking through on this. Just do that. I didn't really, I don't know, maybe it's obvious at this point based on what I've been saying, but I didn't really plan out a lot of how I was going to do this. I thought it would just be a really simple landscape so I could just practice some gouache. But I really liked how it was kind of turning out. Let's see. All right. Probably need clean up some of these details. Not that much though. The good news is any massive screw ups I can just paint right over. When I do the watercolor layer, they'll still show through, but gouache should cover them up. Depending on how it goes, maybe in the future I'll just go straight to ink. I like to work with ink as well, but I was thinking about accentuating some of those background details, but frankly, further distance should have kind of lighter strokes anyway. Just as a way to indicate depth. See, kind of. I think I might redo this right here because I'm not quite. If you look at these ponies, they're super stout, which was the intent. But the further, a little longer I went, I started kind of going into a more generic shape. Maybe I'll. And you have to just be willing to undo things sometimes, even when they look good. I felt like it looked pretty good, but it wasn't going to quite look right as it was. Which puts these two pretty close to being abreast, essentially. Here's another one that, if you look at that arm, or that leg and that leg, that's kind of weird looking now. Which is again why you don't, this is why you bounce around. Helps you see the whole picture a little bit better. I don't know if that's even making sense anymore. Location. Is that better? I don't know. Let's add some saddlebags over here. And this guy should have a hood or something. Frankly, they would all probably have hoods of some kind. Just because they're traveling, I'll leave him without a hood, just as a kind of symbolic character. Maybe he can't be bothered with such things, I don't know. You don't, for example, see Napoleon Bonaparte running around with cooking equipment and practical clothes. Not in the paintings, anyway. All right, this house is technically cutting into this guy's face, so let's fix that. Again, a lot of this probably could have been avoided with a little extra planning, but that's all right. Part of the reason I like this scene so much is it lets me just draw a bunch of dwarves. I like dwarves mostly for their nice, solid shapes, very thick, chunky shapes. It's kind of just fun to do. As a kid, I always really liked elves. But I don't find them as fun to draw. Get some more background cutting into this face. Get a slightly different hair pattern here. See, shininess. Let's really make this thing look a little more solid here. That's on that side. Just that slight mark. A little trick you can do is you'll have these really broad, thick shapes, and when you come through, you can kind of refine them, add extra lines or kind of extra details in the actual stroke when you go a little more strongly over them. Okay. I think this is looking pretty good. Let's see. Might mess with Gandalf's boots here. In The Hobbit, it's actually kind of interesting because The Hobbit describes Gandalf as having a blue hat, I think it's a silver scarf and a gray cloak, and massive boots. I actually tried to capture that in my recent Gandalf drawing with just really big boots. But everyone familiar with the movies will probably have a different expectation. Another interesting thing is that it says that Gandalf's eyebrows actually stick out beyond the brim of his hat, which makes me wonder if he doesn't just have like a super tiny hat brim, that or he's got some cartoony World of Warcraft eyebrows. This is a horse proper. That's a little more standard shaped. I haven't really, I mean, it'd be neat, but I'm not really sure how I could show Bilbo, because at this point of the story, basically Bilbo is asleep and he runs off to catch up. But I guess I could have tried to do something where you could see him do his window, you just see him passed out or something, but I think it's a little late at this point. And it kind of has to be, I mean, it wouldn't really work super well because if I want a big long trail of dwarves, it doesn't make sense for there to be much visibility into what Bilbo's up to. Yeah, I think that's pretty decent. I don't know. I'll have to think if there's much else that really needs done at this point. I honestly think this could stand on its own at this point. I still think I want to paint it. If only to get practice. But I think it could stand on its own. Just as a fun, sketchy thing. I obviously started this prior to recording here, but kind of like trying to make the Shire make a little more sense, because a lot of the images, it just shows a bunch of gardens and stuff of flowers or just grass. But for hobbits to eat as much as they talk about, and for them to all live so close together, I mean, they have to be growing crops somewhere nearby. I can't imagine you just have, fields and fields and fields of grass and then have to walk past it all and then finally get to your food. I assume most of them are supposed to be agriculturally focused, so I'm trying to bring more practicality here. Some of these details. I should probably focus a little more on the foreground. Honestly, I might just see. So we're gonna have some maybe like cobblestones. Just trying to draw them something that looks like it would be in perspective. That's why it's all squashed. Kind of looking. Not be afraid to intersect with existing information. Kind of imagining something like that. So I'll put some kind of sketchy cobblestones here. I think what I'll do, just because I'm obviously putting a ton of time into this and I don't want to mess it up. If it turns out well, I'll probably put it on my wall or something. Just because it's something I really don't want to mess up, I may spend the time just to build it in 3D. Not to any super detail, but just enough that I can kind of know, okay, here's a little hill here, here's a little hill there, etc. Just to get some lighting information. And then kind of dummy out. I just paste in just a bunch of random horses doing, not even posed, just kind of in place. And then from there, I'll some cobblestones over this way too. Presumably they're not just cutting through people's houses like jerks. That will let me test out different lightings. Let's see what I really want to do. Let's see, we've got some, you know what, I spend all that time working on some of the stuff and I'm probably just gonna cover it up with just like a rock or something. In some random spots, just to give it kind of that interesting, I don't know if I like how I did that, but just give it some interesting details here. This will be our grass, kind of where the foliage meets the cobbles. Some here. Maybe we'll even have some kind of along here. Sometimes, depending on the road, it will actually have a couple of ruts specifically for wagons. Maybe I'll see about doing something like that. I don't know. I'll at least give it a few tufts of grass here and there to give it a little more interest, I suppose. This horse apparently is going right off into the grass. Interesting. Oh. That's probably okay. It just means that he's hanging out a little off to the left, or the right, if you're looking at it from his perspective. And there's nobody riding beside him. Maybe the dwarves aren't quite sure what to make of Gandalf just yet. Or they have other buddies they'd rather talk about too. Talk to, I should say. One thing I'm seeing that is a little bit of a problem here is I have all this blank space with no information in it. So I'm probably going to want to do something right here. And just in kind of behind him. I mean, there's something to be said for accentuating this, but I don't want to accentuate the horse necessarily. I don't know. So maybe I'll, you know what, I think some bushes might be appropriate. It's kind of a nice hedge. That will let us kind of break this up a little bit. It gives us some excuse for why there's not a lot going on over there. It also gives the hobbits a little bit of privacy. Because now all of a sudden they have this nice hedge that separates themselves a little bit from themselves and just travelers. Again, hobbits are very social and friendly here, but doesn't necessarily mean they want to hang out with what they'd call queer folk. Got this guy reading over here. I don't know how well you can see it, but he's got a little book. He's old and he's trying to ignore these newcomers best he can. He doesn't look at them, maybe they won't bug him, you know. Some hobbits are friendly towards Gandalf, but these other guys, I don't know. I don't know how they'd feel about that. All right, I think that's great, because now we have an excuse. Just add some shadow in here. Maybe I shouldn't, because it's going to be funny if I go and model this in 3D and then say, oh yeah, actually I hate that lighting source. And I don't like how these are now all shaded that way, but I don't know. A lot of times I kind of default to kind of midday lighting without even thinking about it. Which isn't exactly always dynamic to do, but maybe there are just a couple of random flowers over here. I don't know. At least it makes it kind of look like things are going on. You can see where I was messing around with how high I wanted the horse to be a little bit over here. It's kind of a little bit of a remnant there. You probably can't see this terror. Well, maybe you can, I don't know. There's a little hobbit right here tending to the garden. She is putting stuff into a crate that is no longer really visible. That's the way it works. You draw a lot of stuff and then you sometimes just have to throw it away. Which is perfectly fine. I think this is head on, so I'll just do basically 1 point perspective here. This guy's on a little pitch. I'm kind of just livening it up just a little bit for some of this closer stuff. I'll probably still leave a lot of it. I'm done here. It's kind of funny because in the books, I don't really go much. I mean, you get the idea, the circle door and obviously living in a hole. But there's not a lot of information about is it going for English Tudor type architecture? Is it, are they mud walls? Or like stucco or something? I don't know. So I have a few different styles, I suppose. It's a little more stone based. This one's got kind of more wood, and this one does too, some lanterns. So this is like basically dead on. This one's kind of tilted. So you see it kind of a little more on one side. We got grass here. These support beams. Got a little fat hobbit up here. Hand in the pocket. He's watering his plants. And I kept really loose, so it's probably not super visible. I also have a few like chimneys and things kind of poking out for. It only makes sense to have chimneys, even though maybe they aren't super visible. And this up here is supposed to be a guy laying down. I can hardly even see what he's doing pose-wise. Maybe I'll just remove it and then add a little something back in. And we got our trees and the likes way back out here. Maybe I'll make this a little more prominent since this is so much closer. Kind of imagine this tree being up here. Anytime you want to make massive scenes like this, definitely look at a lot of references, especially if you're trying to copy something exactly like Eiffel Tower, you'll maybe only need to look at one. But it is very tricky to try to make sure you're doing proper perspective and make sure the poses make sense and everything else without any kind of visual information to kind of help you think through some of the problems. Okay. Yeah, there's some stuff I can still do. A little more shading, which again, I don't know if I should be doing this. This is potentially going to be all undone. I need to, at this point though, probably build it in 3D. Just because it will help me get the most convincing lighting. It'll take more time. But I'm hoping this just turns out incredible to the point where I really want to put it on my wall. I think it looks pretty good as is, but put some shading on that. A little bit of ambient occlusion. probably will just do maybe not a perfectly like noon shadow, but probably midday. Which I guess is saying something, considering Bilbo in this moment had overslept. I have to sleep a long time, I guess, to have it be midday. So, I don't know. Maybe I'll think about it. But yeah, that's kind of the gist of my process here. Certainly let me know if you want to see anything else kind of like this. This is, I don't usually do any kind of process type videos. I think actually I'll go ahead and add some streaks here just to show the sheen of the hair. Something to note here too is you really want to get, I mean, everyone's at a different point, right? And I don't really have a target audience for this at the moment. But something I've really found helpful is just trying to maximize my strokes. Where, you see all that information I was able to provide by just a bunch of squiggles. You don't want your strokes to, the more impact they can provide in the less amount of effort, the better. But if you don't know your basics, like perspective or color theory or any number of other, basic principles, definitely start there. Something else to think about while I'm rambling is art really doesn't require fancy tools. There's always somebody trying to sell you either 3D brushes for digital art or the fanciest paints. And to be fair, some paints are archival versus not archival. But at the end of the day, if you have paper and pencil, you can do very interesting things. I just made that kid look like a little old angry man. Tone that back down. Remove what looks like a beard now. Keep it simple. They're pretty far away. Far enough anyway. All right, let's see. Our smoke coming out of our chimney. Some windows. I kind of like this. I could go back over the background, but even if I wasn't going to paint it, it would probably make sense to leave it pale. Yeah, I'll probably call it here. Maybe I'll add more strokes, but if I do another video, I'll update and let you know. Maybe we'll do some painting together. We'll see.